Well, many thanks all. I hope Sawyer is still on because I wanted to mention that in my Our Earth channel, I have all kinds of caving videos, as hopefully you're seeing here. Southeastern New Mexico, the Guadalupe Mountains, Colorado's got some nice caves. Not as spectacular as South Dakota caves, but I've been to some caves in South Dakota as well. But I love the caving community. It's a great community of people, and that was fascinating to hear, Sawyer, what you had to say about that. And for and as a way of introduction, some of you may have heard my address an hour and a half ago or so, but because these are all recorded and probably you're seeing this in chunks, I wanted to give my contact information. If there's anything I can do assistance-wise for you to support any aspect of what you're doing in the future, that's what I'm here for. And I also learn a ton from you all, just finding out what the successes are, the challenges, and so on. I think we're all in that same situation. So please feel free to get a hold of me. Also, I wanted to share this, but I ran out of time in the last presentation. Last time I was with you all, I went to 44.99. Look at this. Look at all those zeros. It's a beautiful thing. It truly, let's just have a pause. That is great. Here I am. I highly encourage walking and hiking in a tie. It's a beautiful thing there. 44.99. Look at that. Look at that ground cover, and look at that South Dakota vista. Wow, that is a beauty, isn't it? And it was a great time. It was a great time. Okay, so in this session, what we're going to dig into together is the following. We're going to go through this flow of collecting, mapping, analyzing, and communicating field data with ArcGIS. I know many of you, probably most of you, are what I would call GIS power users. Think about this as perhaps you haven't done much with web GIS tools in the past, and you want to, so this would be good for you, but also with your your educator hat on, how do you help colleagues sort of dip some toes into the waters of geospatial? I think this is one way of doing that because it's fairly light. You don't have to know a ton about GIS to get these tools to work together. And indeed, that's why many of these tools were actually developed. Story maps, dashboards, Survey 123 is one of the field tools that you have access to, because they were intentionally designed so that you didn't have to be a GIS expert to actually create these. So for those few reasons, and probably more we could talk about, I think these are compelling tools, especially as I mentioned in the previous presentation, working in tandem gives you a lot of power. So that being said, as a sort of an introduction to this, you've got these tools in this web GIS paradigm, if you will. You can also dig into what's going on to make all of these things function and shine. And at the end of this presentation, I'll invite you to, dip a few more toes in maybe the intermediate section of the swimming pool, the semi-deep area, and start customizing the story map or the dashboard or the survey. But this first part is going to be very, approachable. I get it, Joseph. I'm confident I can do that myself. That's the goal, to give you confidence that you can do this. This is all part of the apps era of GIS, where you've got these abilities, these capabilities to bring what you're doing to a much wider audience than before. Not that more is always better, right? We still have our community, we still have our ways of communicating with each other and with the GIS professionals, but there are certain instances where you do want to have community engagement and or communicate the results of what you're researching or doing to a broader community. So that's where these apps come in. I'm not going to go into all of these, but many of them have been mentioned at the conference thus far. Today, we're going to be into this story maps, ArcGIS dashboards, Survey 123. I like to group these in, they're difficult to group, but office apps, you can see others there. I mentioned Business Analyst Web that I use with business schools in the last presentation. Field apps, all of these are really, a lot of those, Collector, Navigator, that's all in part of field maps now. So slightly out of date slide there, but these are the three gold rectangles that we'll be delving into today. And so I'd like to guide you through, okay, how do I collect the data? How do I get it into a web GIS map? And how do I analyze it a little bit? Probably won't have much time for that. Create a dashboard and then create the story map that sort of wraps it all up. And we'll build this one that I mentioned last time in the previous session, which is basically this, where you've got this walkability map. But as I go through this, think about, of course, what you would do with this, whether it's water quality or historic homes or invasive species or soil chemistry or whatever, how you would actually use these. This example is, again, one that I created, but lots more you could do. So the story map is here. I've got a survey inside the story map. The web GIS map that's sitting in ArcGIS Online is the third component, and then this dashboard is the last component that presents the information in a series of maps and graphs and charts and gauges, and could be a list of things. Lots of things we can do together, but we're going to focus on those things. Okay, well, again, 4 parts. Let's start with Survey 123. Survey 123 was created in a different health crisis than the one that we're in right now. It actually was created in the Ebola crisis about 7 years ago now, 2014, where the UN, WHO, and a few other organizations said, you know, you Esri people, you're too map focused. And we're like, you know, hey, maps, you know, what's not to love? Well, no, we need something, they said, in the field that's very simple to use, and it's form-based for our survey that we want to conduct in West Africa. So that's when Survey 123 actually came into existence. It's working with the WHO and a couple of other health and environmental organizations to create something that's form-based, and it creates a feature service behind the scenes, whereas in a tool like Field Maps, you have to go in and set up the geodatabase. You have to set up the domains and the subtypes, if you know what I mean, and create that and then host it and so on. So there's a lot of GIS-y sort of knowledge that goes into creating those things. Not a deep dive, but certainly a modest amount of knowledge about how GIS and how all these things fit together is required, as opposed to this approach here with Survey 123. I think it's helpful to know a little bit about how GIS works and how to manage content in your web GIS system, for example, ArcGIS Online. That's always very helpful. But again, you don't have to be a GIS expert. So again, thinking about the ways that you could maybe approach this with colleagues and get them excited about this is one of the appeals, I think. So we're going to go through this. The first thing is, hey, why would I even want to teach about or use several components of this platform? Well, obviously to collect data, but also to connect people with issues in their community. You know, we keep hearing these phrases, for example, of geospatial technology not just being a system of engagement or collection and records, but engagement. I'm wearing my map tie, by the way, for you all, just for you. Anyway, the point is we're engaging the community in issues. I have a post on that spatial reserves data blog, by the way, which is spatialreserves.wordpress.com, of just that very thing recently, where I'm a cyclist, probably like many of you, you see these sorts of things in trails, and they're not enough to worry about if you're walking, but if you hit that just right on your bicycle or your trike, bam, it's not a good thing, especially as in this case, I'm looking uphill here, you're hitting it at a fairly decent amount of speed. Well, my community, like many communities now, has a citizen science sort of a portal that's linked to their GIS. And so I submitted a suggestion, again, an example of community engagement, and lo and behold, a couple of days later, I'm seeing these markings on that trail, and then it indeed got repaired. So it's a great example of this actually works. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not in all instances, but I was very pleased at the result of this particular example being, a community engaged citizen, me in this case with my own local government, and them actually repairing what I, a citizen, said, hey, if you could somehow fix this, it would be much appreciated by me and many others. And so that's very much what we're immersed in here. And also to develop skills in field data collection, deciding the core stuff that you and I like to think about when we go out in the field, that we should think about. What units are we going to collect in? What data are we going to collect? All that sort of pre-planning that has to go into before you get out into the field. And then there's also a lot of, in the educational world, as I mentioned in the address a while back, larger, more noble, if you will, goals of inspiring data fluency, working with lots of different kinds of data, critical thinking, spatial accuracy, all of that sort of thing. Can you name this location? Little geographic quiz for you all. It's not South Dakota. I don't know if we have a chat box. That is the 12 Apostles Rocks in Victoria, Australia. Good on you, mates. She'll be right. Beautiful landscape. So the first thing is we want to create our survey. We're going to use Survey 123 for the advantages that I talked about earlier. It's form-centric, not a lot of GIS knowledge required, and you can immediately analyze the results. There is an app that you can get for a mobile device, but you, as I'll explain later, don't actually have to have your users use the app, nor do they have to be signed in to your ArcGIS Online organization to collect data. There's pros and cons of sharing it with the world, with the public. We'll talk about those as well. But the notion of 1, 2, 3 is this: asking a question, getting the answers, and making decisions once you are able to see the data spatially. There are 2 ways to create one of these. Probably many of you know this, but again, thinking about, okay, if you're just getting into this, I just wanted to start with the building blocks. You can use Connect, which is on the right side there. We're not going to use that method today, but if you want to have more functionality, like many of these tools, you can get it. Actually, there's three ways to, in my way of thinking, use many of these tools. One, you get a little bit of you get some functionality, but it's easy, and you can create certain things. Think of story maps. You've got these templates, and you're dragging and dropping, and you're creating text and images, and we'll go through some of that today. If you want to dig deeper, there's the web app builder, and there's the experience builder. You want to dig even deeper than that, you can actually go into the code. Same thing with Survey 123 in some ways, that you've got these at least 2 levels of functionality. You can use Connect, which uses Excel. And if you use Connect, you get more functionality, but you are not dumped into just plain old Excel and expected to figure out how to get it to work. You get the schema in Excel. We're going to use the left side here, the web designer, which is very much like the experience that you have probably had in the past, where you're like in SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, where you're dragging and dropping elements, true, false, Likert scale, image, etc., into a form, and then publishing that form. Then it's into the create map phase. So we'll talk about that in a bit. The lesson, again, this is going to be in the time that we have available in our workshop. I'm going to hit the highlights, but I actually do have a lesson that is 9 pages long. Okay, we're not going to go through all 9 pages, but I think the way that these tools are structured, you're going to be immersed in just a little bit of each of the 4 components, and then you're going to get to about a third of the way through, and you're going to say, Joseph, I understand that. I totally get that, and I'm confident that I can move forward. So we won't need to, and nor will you need to actually go through all of these. But if you want to, you could. And that is all part of this. So I'm going to put this in the chat box, because this is the actual lesson that I'm taking highlights of today for our workshop together. And let me go to the chat box here ever so briefly. Here it is. And
So
this
this
is
is
the
on
actual
this
level.
is on the Esri community site, right?
Yes, it is.
I thought it might be on Learn, but no, it's on the Esri community site, which I highly recommend people get involved in if they're not. It's a great place to learn things and share things.
Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, this particular case, I've got the essay about why I did it, how I did it, but then because I wanted to give people exactly all the tools that they would need, I actually have, this sounds a bit old school, but I have a zip file. And that way, if they're in a whatever kind of situation they're in, they can get the zip file and then they'll get all the components, all the images, the text that they can copy and paste into the story map and the dashboard, etc. Anyway, they have everything that they'll need at their fingertips. The reason why I like doing it that way, just to appeal to your instructional side of your brains, is that if you just say to folks, here are the tools and now go ahead and go forth, live long and prosper. There's too many rabbit holes. There's too many bunny trails at that point. It's like, okay, well, what do I want to tell the story of? What do I want to collect data on? So I give people a model, and then once they do that, again, they'll get the confidence that, okay, now I can adapt it to what I really want to study. Excellent, super. Okay, so back on our, if you unzip that, you're going to get a Joseph's hard drive. Scary. Hopefully you're seeing a couple of folders. And in this folder, once you unzip that file, do you see these 5 elements? You're going to get a lesson.
Looks great, Joseph.
Okay,
we can see it.
Yeah. Super. The lesson in 2 different formats, a PDF and a doc file, which I'd provide the doc file so that if you wanted to modify it for something that you want your colleagues to collect on, I don't know, water valves or something, you can do it. And then I've got a couple of images as samples, and then I have the PDF. Okay, the PDF is actually this right here. So it leads you through all 4 of these components. Great. So taking that as an example, we say, okay, we're going to go to survey 1, 2, 3, and we're going to create our survey, our field survey. So let's just do that. There's a couple ways to get into survey 1, 2, 3. One of them is survey123.arcgis.com. And then if you have a ArcGIS online account, you can go ahead and sign in there. If you don't have one, let me know, because there are ways to get it even if you're outside of some sort of government agency, academia. There's other ways to get an ArcGIS online account, and I'm happy to guide you through some of those avenues. But once you get an ArcGIS online account, then you have access to survey 1, 2, 3. Another way to get into it is inside, let's say you go into arcgis.com and you go in and you sign in with your credentials. And sorry about my big fingers here, and I might turn off my video because I'm without my second monitor now. So you'll see these big GIS hands. But the other way to get into this is with this application launcher. So you're in ArcGIS Online, and you've got this thing that, depending on who your organizational administrator is, you have access to a set of tools: business analyst web, community analyst, dashboards, etc., story maps, ArcGIS Pro, and so on. You can launch those things from in here. So you can go into survey 1, 2, 3 right from here if you want, if you're already in your, or you can go into survey123.arcgis.com. Either way is you're going to get to where we want to go. Okay, so I'm going to use that second method right here and go into survey 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to start with a survey on walkability. So once you create content in this platform, whether it's story maps, dashboards, web maps, you're going to get a zone where you can manage your content, which is very nice. And once you start creating surveys, you're going to have something that looks like this, where you have your existing past surveys. It's very much analogous to the story maps zone where you have all the story maps that you've created. The other way of looking at the content, of course, is just inside ArcGIS Online. It just doesn't look as pretty, right? So you can go to content and say, oh, well, I've got a whole bunch of content in there, but I can also go to my surveys, and I'm sorry we don't have subfolders. That would be kind of nice, wouldn't it? But all the surveys get put into a survey dash, and then whatever you're titled your survey. So you can actually go to this survey where I've got a form, a survey that I've created, and a feature layer that I've actually created from the survey, from the data I put in my survey 1, 2, 3. That's another way to navigate to the same content. It looks a little prettier though in this kind of a format. And indeed in here, you can edit and design and do some things we're going to go to in the next 3 hours. Just kidding, we don't have 3 hours. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the basics and say, I want a new survey here. And this is where on that slide, for example, I was referring to, I can go into Excel here, or I can, I've got a standard water quality survey. Maybe I can start with an existing water quality survey and then modify it. So you don't actually have to start all of these from scratch. But in the case of today, I actually do want to start from scratch because I actually want to start you all off with, how do I create one of these basic surveys? Show me how easy it is and how straightforward it is. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that it was easy. GIS is complicated, as Curtis talked about in his videos and in his workshops. I mean, we've got a complex Earth here, right? So I don't think we're going to get to, just as a slight deviation from our workshop topic, where it is completely easy. It's a complex Earth, it's dynamic, it's rapidly changing, and we've got all kinds of complex issues, right? So GIS evolves, but I think it's inherently complex because we have a complex Earth, I guess is what I'm getting at. Okay, so I'm going to get started with a blank survey. And this is where you're going to have very much the same kind of experience where you have with, for example, Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or any of those others where you're actually dragging and dropping things into a survey form. So once I do that, what I'm going to get is the ability to add certain items. And while that's creating, what it's doing behind the scenes is creating a feature service. So as opposed to field maps, where you have to, set up the geodatabase and the feature types and the domains and the subtypes and all that kind of stuff, this is actually creating it behind the scenes, which is why it takes a little while to get rolling. But just as an example, what we're going to do in here is we're going to create this kind of a survey where we're going to have a question on, is it pedestrian friendly or unfriendly, rate the walkability, tick all the choices, where is it located, and submit a photograph. That's what we're going to do in this particular section. And let's say you've got an existing Excel spreadsheet that you want to create a survey on. You can import that into survey 1, 2, 3. And while this is creating, oh heavens, creating a survey, I'm going to go through a couple of the other capabilities. So I'm going to create a new survey, blank survey, get started, and I'm going to create that from scratch. Now, one of the things that I wanted to go over is, let's see here, right here. You can connect these tools with a higher precision GPS. So let's say in my case, I'm going to create a survey on walkability. I don't care if it's sub-meter accuracy or sub-centimeter accuracy. I'm just interested in, it's in this block, basically. But obviously there are other uses, other surveys. You can use a variety of techniques. For example, the folks at Arcgis, they've got a survey 1, 2, 3 enabled tool for your phone that enables you to conduct measurements like the height of a pole or the area. Again, that's sort of a little bit of a deeper dive, but it's not high precision. Many of you have even higher requirements, and there are ways that you can do this with those higher requirements as well. Let's go back to our survey and see, oh, okay, here we go. So now we've got our blank survey, and I'm going to say, you know what? I really want a rating. I want a Likert scale, Okay, so what is I want how walkable is this location. Okay. We have a couple of defaults, and I don't want disagree or agree because that's not too intuitive, right? What I want to do is horrible to excellent. Okay, save, and there I go. So just like that, I can create these. I'm not going to go through all of these in the interest of time, but I think you know where I'm going with this. I'm basically going to be adding elements into my survey. Okay, so that's one thing. One more thing that I just wanted to show is that in the past, up until about a year and a half ago, you could only add point data into your survey 123. And now we have the capability. We have so much capability, my precious. This is awesome. For example, to add lines and polygons. So now we have a map tool as opposed to in the past where we had points. So if I said map here, it's going to say, okay, well, let's add that map. Here's where I can say I only am going to collect data in the middle of Mitchell, South Dakota. So obviously I would zoom into Mitchell for this particular one. In this case, I'm going to say, you know what, that's okay, but I want to customize it a little bit. Maybe I'm going to put a base map of imagery or OpenStreetMap. It really depends on what you want. And as you know, as I think many of you know, you can customize the base map nowadays. So you could put your own customized base map behind the scenes as well. So that's a little bit of a deeper dive, but I'm hoping that's helpful. And so here's my map extent. I'm going to collect some points in New Mexico, just because I've got some images there that I want us to look at. And so, okay, that looks good there to me. I'm going to go with the default topographic base, and where is the location? Okay, great. I'm going to save that. So now I've got 2 questions in here. You can see that it's pretty intuitive, and you don't need me to go through every single one of these additions. Image, I'm going to add a characteristics of the site, and so on. So once I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and preview that. Just like a lot of tools, you really should spend a little time making sure that it's working before you, especially before you share it with others. So far, so good. These are clickable, and okay, I can do this, and I can even give my current location, which is right here in Colorado. So that wouldn't work very well, right? So if I went down to Grants, New Mexico, I could do that. Okay, so that part is working, and I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so far so good. I'm going to exit the preview, collaborate. Let's spend a little time here. Ooh, Joseph, it's a draft survey. You've got to publish it. Okay, so I've got to go to design, and I'm going to actually publish this so I can go through a couple of the other things that I think are pertinent to our workshop. So I'm going to publish that, and I didn't set the title yet, so it's probably going to give me a warning. But the point is, it's dragging and dropping, and that's good. Okay. Hang on, folks. I'm gonna be in a meeting here, but I'm gonna exit the meeting. There we go. Okay. I don't want those pop-ups to be in our way. Okay. So far so good. It's publishing my survey, which means it's creating the feature class, and then I have to decide a couple of things. One, who do I want to share this with? That's a decision that is inherent in our web-based GIS world, right, folks? Do I want to share it with a group of collaborators, with the whole world, or somewhere in between, or with nobody? It's just something that I'm working on myself. That is where this comes in. So there's a couple things in addition to that topic of who do I want to be able to contribute to this survey. There is a way for you to vet or review the survey results that come in. Important, especially if you're crowdsourcing. You can also ask the user to, as you can see here at the top, do I want them to actually have the app on their device when they fill out the survey? If you're sharing this with the public and you truly want it crowdsourced, then I like to just open the browser. Can they collect offline? Can they collect offline? Yes, they can. They can submit offline when they're not connected, and then submit all the 10 survey points that they've collected when they come back into Wi-Fi range, if that makes sense. So if they have the browser, if they have the app, it actually looks a little bit nicer on their device, okay, than if they did not have the app, the Survey 123 app. But it looks almost the same, just in a regular browser. And so, okay, who can submit to it? This is the sharing option. What can the submitters do? Can they only add? Here's a little story to help this make sense. I was working with Penn State and Esri and a couple of others to develop MOOCs, the massive open online courses, and we had a couple of Survey 123s, like where are you located when you are taking this course, and so on. Especially for something like that, we did not allow them to edit and update, because when you've got 30,000 people in a course, there's probably going to be one person that says, I can edit people's records and put everybody on the tip of Greenland, right? So most of the time when you're sharing with the broader community in a crowdsourced way, you only want them to add. That leads to, admittedly, a little bit of a frustration, because people can only add, and if they made a mistake, what do? Add it again. So there are things to consider. My survey, I'm going to leave open until the survey author, turns it off. Okay, so those are the main things to think about when you're creating this. And then with this, do you always want to use the latest and greatest version of Survey 123? There are things to think about there. I don't require, on most of mine, to require the latest version. The data, we don't have any records in here yet, but if we did, we'd be able to preview it and do a little bit of analysis. There's not lots of analysis tools in here, but you can get pie charts and bar charts, and of course a web map of who's responded. But that's basically the workflow. You're creating the survey, you're publishing the survey, and then you're ending up with, back on the content, a feature service. So let's go into my walkability survey. And so let's say I go into the walk. I've got lots of surveys in here. So if I go into this one, I'm seeing several elements. One of them is a form. What is the walkability of this location? If I go into that form, it's going to put me in the metadata page. I never metadata I didn't like. That's a little geo pun. Sorry. Anyway, pay attention to this. You don't have to write your master's thesis in here, but you've probably heard many people in the past talk about this in more length. I'm going to give it a short shrift here, but the point is, can you add to the data that's in here? Yes, you can. You can populate this so that people have a little more information to make an informed decision. So in this case, what is the walkability of this location? I'm going to open this in Survey 123. So this is sort of like a cooking show in some ways, where I gave you a little bit of design, but now we're going to look at what it looks like managed in Survey 123 website. So here we're back in the construction zone of our Survey 123, and had we had a little more time to spend together, it would have looked like this. And I'm hoping, though, that in that 5 minutes or so that I was dragging and dropping, you say, oh, yeah, I totally get that. We don't need to go through pedestrian friendly or unfriendly, rate the walkability. I have a multiple choice one that I dragged in here. Okay, where is it located? Submit a photograph. So 5 more minutes, we would have had this whole thing done. And now, since this one has actual data points in it, I can show you what the analysis tab looks like in here. You can see here that, again, you're not going to get tons of analytics, but at least enough And you can also export into an Excel spreadsheet at this point if you want to. Okay, so then let's have a preview of what it looks like on a web map inside ArcGIS Online. Okay, so far so good. What do I have the settings here? I have just used the version of the survey that was published, and then I also have this, which is the survey link that I send to people. The other last bit on the design before we move off of survey 1, 2, 3 that I think is kind of overlooked oftentimes, but it's helpful, is this at the right-hand side here. Excellent. Your data was sent successfully. If you wish, see the point on this interactive web map. I like to provide the users with, it's sort of like the incentive that you have with your fitness apps. Ooh, I've walked 5 miles. If I walk around the block one more time, I'll get 5.1, right? So it's that whole sense of, I want to see my results instantaneously, and then it maybe incentivizes me for collecting a couple of other points, and so on in this case. I also, on certain surveys, I have do you want to submit another point? Go ahead and submit another point. So that's great. All right, folks. That's another thing I wanted to mention. Okay, so once this is done, let's go back to ArcGIS Online and let's take a look at what this looks like in my content zone. So I'm going to go back a couple of pages here, and this is my metadata page. So I'm going to go back one more, and I'll see a couple of elements: the form, the feature service, and a couple of other things that we'll talk about in the final part of our workshop. The feature service is what gets created as a blank. It's just the schema, doesn't have any data in it once you create the survey. Obviously, once you and others put data into your survey, that gets added to a feature service. What I do with the feature layer, the hosted feature layer, let's go ahead and open that in a new tab. The next step is I want to create a map out of it. And you may say, well, hey, Joseph, it was already a map, right? Because you looked at it inside the design form. That's not really the same as what we're going to do here next. So if I want to, I can open this up in either the new map viewer, which came out in May 2021, that probably some of you have seen and have used. The new map viewer it's got blending, it's got charting, it's got some additional functionality that the classic map viewer does not have. But right now we're sort of in these two worlds, in my opinion, because the classic ArcGIS Online map viewer has the analytical tools in it, the buffering, the geocoding, the overlay. And so we need it still for our analysis. But at some point, hopefully in December, we're going to have the analytical tools migrate to the new map viewer. So, but in the meantime, you folks know it's all about keeping the knees bent in the world of GIS. So I can open it up either in the classic or the new map viewer. I can also open this up in a brand new map. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in the classic because I built this survey, as you saw back when I was at Mitchell in 2019. Is when I first got the idea. And now I've got this right here. Okay, so I've got these points, and in my walkability data, I've got 536 points collected in there so far. Okay, so if I was creating this from scratch, if we were doing this from start to finish, if we had time in our workshop to do that, I would create the survey. I always do this. I always populate it with 1 or 2 points to make sure they work. And then I create a map from the feature service. So you saw create a new map from the feature service. I create a new map. It's going to have 1 or 2 or however many test points you put in there. If you're doing a very scientific, rigorous study, you're going to need to take those points out. Note to self to take those test points out at some point. But then you're going to have a web map, right? A web map. And the web map is what you'll need to create the story map and the dashboard. So you've got a web map now. Great. How do I create a dashboard from the web map? In the classic map viewer in ArcGIS Online, it's actually under this, I'm going to save as, and I'm going to call it the walkability for the Black Hills Mapping Conference. How does that sound? And I know this is a little bit redundant, but I actually put what the thing is in the title. Even though in ArcGIS Online, when you use that content view, you see the kinds of elements that are in there: story map, dashboard, survey, feature service, or feature class, etc. You see that in there, but I tend to overdo and put the map in the title or dashboard or something. And I can take it out later if I want to. Okay, so I'm going to save this map. Great. And I'm going to have a new instance now. If I don't like those symbols, I can change those symbols, of course. I can say, well, gosh, I've got it. Is it pedestrian friendly or unfriendly? Okay, how about two different options there? Okay, do I like those options? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to say yes. You saw in my actual one that I published, I have a little pedestrian symbol there. So I've customized it. I've made a little GIF or a PNG of my pedestrian symbol that's green for walkable, and hollow for not walkable. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to go to this right here and say, I am good with the default colors here, which, as you can see, may not be all that intuitive, but okay, I've got those two things. Great. So now, inside here in the classic viewer, I actually think this is a slightly counterintuitive, to be perfectly honest, since we're all among friends here. Under Share is the Create a Web App, and underneath Create a Web App is Create a Dashboard. In the new map viewer, it's under Create an App, which makes more sense. You've got the share and save in a different place in the new map viewer, so it's actually improved. In the classic, which is what we're doing here, because I wanted to touch a little bit on analytical tools, time permitting, it's actually under Share. Not the best, perhaps, but creating a web app. Okay, great. Another slight change with terminology is in the new map viewer, there is a Create Instant App, which gives you access to certain commonly used templates, if you will. The old terminology, the classic terminology, was configurable apps, and the new is instant apps. Okay, but dashboards will be available in both. And so I'm going to say, hey, I want to create a dashboard. And this is where, again, I know this is slightly redundant, but I'm going to actually say create a dashboard for my walkability data. Okay, so far so good. Hopefully everybody's doing okay so far. You can see that these are fairly intuitive, right? You create a survey, you get a feature class, you create a map from that, and now we're on this create a dashboard from the map. Okay, so far so good. Noting the sharing options there. And now we're going to be in this dashboard creation zone. Just like Survey 123 and just like story maps, you get a construction zone, if you will. And the default in the dashboard is the map takes up the whole thing. Okay, well, that's fine, but I want additional elements. And just like the story maps construction zone, and just like Survey 123, everything is pretty much driven on this plus sign. Again, this is all sort of using existing templates, and they're somewhat configurable, but if you want to dig deeper, remember there's Web App Builder, there's the Experience Builder, and then there's also getting into the SDKs and the APIs, and the developer.arcgis.com page with tutorials. So, okay. I want a pie chart. I know Curtis doesn't like pie charts, but we're going to make a pie chart just as an illustration of some of the things. What is the walkability of this location? That's my layer. That's my feature service, right? And so I can say, hey, what do I have here? Interesting. Pedestrian friendly or unfriendly? Okay. Well, gosh, what do I have here? Grouped. Pedestrian friendly or unfriendly. Oh, here we go. So group values, and roughly 2/3, or I guess 3/4 really, are pedestrian friendly thus far. Okay, that's looking good. Can I customize this? Can I take out that null? Can I make the fonts bigger? You know that we can do all that, and I don't really want to spend your valuable time customizing that. Realizing that, of course, this is not Photoshop. You can't infinitely customize. You get some tools, but you don't have the power is in the mapping. Okay, so that's good. I'm liking that. I don't like the size of that, so now it's just a matter of doing this kind of thing. Okay, what else do I want to add? Let's add just one more thing that will make this shine just a little bit more, and that is, let's add a gauge. Okay, again, what's our feature service? I want to count. Do I want orange? No. Okay, I can change that if I want to. So I'm going to say done on that one as well. And now I've got two things, but I wanted to illustrate that just by going to these sort of boxes, you can say, well, you know, I really want that to be over here. Let's try that again. I want that to be there. I'm going to dock it as a row. I'm going to tidy this up. I'm going to pan the map a little bit. So you see where I'm going with this. Now I've got some of the elements that I really want to include in my final dashboard. Okay, so with a couple of other additions, we could have a list. And in another workshop, we could say, well, if something happens, let's say in this walkability example, if I get to the point where exactly or 75 or more % of the places in my community, let's say we didn't have a global study, let's say we just had a community study, are walkable, I want something to happen in the dashboard. I want red text to come up. I want some behavior to happen. So dashboards allow you to do that sort of mid functionality, deeper dive kinds of things. So recognize that there's no shortage of documentation as to how to do all of that. Okay, but you can see that, okay, I get it, Joseph. I'm dragging and dropping elements. I can save this thing. Someone tell me why the save button is still like a floppy disk. Does anybody in this audience know what a floppy disk is anymore? Maybe you've seen them in a museum. I know what one is. I've saved a few of those, but okay, I'm going to save this, and now I've got my dashboard. Great. Now, coming back to our lesson, let's go here and let's go scrolling up a little bit. What we've done so far is we've created the survey. We've created a map from a feature service. Okay. Remember, the end goal is to understand something better, not just to map things. So just a little nudge for what I said earlier today. Now we're creating the dashboard. Okay, great. Now we're going to create the story map that links all of these things together. So, okay, how do we do that? One of the ways to do that is we'll go into the ArcGIS Online zone. And remember, there was the application launcher. So let's go ahead and go into, if I can find that tab that goes into, here we go. If I go into this, remember this thing? I can get into story maps here. I can also go to, like we did with Survey 123, we can go to storymaps.arcgis.com as well. Multiple ways to get into things. Kind of depends on your comfort with the way you do things, and it really doesn't matter as long as you can get the job done, right, folks? So let's go ahead and go into story maps. Just like many of the tools, all of the tools really that we've talked about today, story maps have evolved. They've been around since 2010. They came in when Alan Carroll came over to Esri from National Geographic as chief cartographer and said, I've got this idea to, have multimedia story maps. We said, Alan, that's great. Here's a team. Here's the platform. And for a couple years, Alan and his team, which would have been a kind of a cool job, created a story map every week. But even better was when all of us, you all and other communities said, we really want to use these to explain the results of our research, to explain what our community is doing, what our organization is doing, et cetera. Wide variety of things. There's over 2.5 million story maps in existence right now of a wide variety of quality. So again, like I said earlier today, pay attention to the sources, the metadata for all of these elements. Be critical of the data. Okay. So that being said, I've got the story maps creation zone looks kind of like survey 123, or some of the other things that we've looked at, where you get this area with thumbnails and a little bit of metadata as to the stuff that is in your content area. Okay. There is a way to share these elements, by the way, in case any of you are curious, between organizations. It's a lot better than it was 6 months ago. It's still not what I would call very easy, but there are ways to do it, to share these elements, to transfer either ownership or to share these with others, and also to have multiple collaborators, which is what a lot of people are asking about. But okay, let's focus on, now I've got this zone, which looks somewhat like the other construction zones that we were using earlier. And so we can say, gosh, that's great, but what if I want to create a new story? Okay, how do I do that? Here's my existing stories, and I've got a big button up here that says new story. Okay, and just like some of the other tools that we've talked about, you can start from scratch. You can use some existing templates. I want to start from scratch just to show you that it's fairly straightforward. Again, depends on what you want to accomplish. So all of the notions about thinking about your audience and what you want to say. I always like to think of, Mark Twain. If I had more time, I would have made that novel shorter. I love that. It's probably what you remember from maybe your master's thesis committee saying, you need to focus. You can't accomplish this in 1 or 2 years. So I think much of that guidance applies to story maps, thinking about your audience. How long do you want it to be? What elements do you want in there? But I've got a whole different workshop on all those sorts of things. Let's keep it focused here. I'm going to go to my lesson. So in the lesson, which remember is tied to that blog that I indicated earlier, where I actually have all of the text that you need to build the survey, to build the feature layer, to build the map, to build the dashboard. If we had more time, it basically would have looked somewhat like this. But here now on our story map, which is the last part of our workshop, it's all in that tutorial. I can say, oh, well, my title is going to be this. So I'm going to say, let's go to our story map zone. How walkable is your community? Okay, great. And then let's scoot these so they're side by side. How about a survey and map showing the pedestrian friendliness of your community? You know where I'm going with this. Okay, so far so good. And how about a quote about why walkability is important to communities? Okay, so how do I do that? Plus sign drives everything forward. Text here. What kind of options do I have? Not much. You've got some capability, but again, this isn't Illustrator or anything else like that. But still, I can, I've got colors and fonts and things like that. So, okay, so far so good. What about a separator? Okay, now I've got the beginnings of my story map. I have add cover image. This is where I can upload from the web, etc. So I'm going to go to the place where I have my pictures of my walkable or not walkable places, and I'm going to go ahead. This isn't a very exciting one, is it? But okay, I've got, is that walkable or not? There's no sidewalk there, but I don't see any traffic. So I've got an image and I've got a couple of strings of text. Okay. I'm not going to, again, spend your valuable time doing this kind of thing any more than I've done right so far. So being sensitive to your own, daily things that you need to do, let's get into what I think is the most powerful thing about all this. And that is.
So Joseph, before we go on, that you share that zip file.
Yep.
That basically has all this stuff, so we could go through your tutorial with this exact same data ourselves and do this,
exactly.
right?
Exactly, because you can we're on page 6 of 9 in the tutorial.
Okay.
And so you can actually paste every single one of these things, and you can see I've got screenshots and all that good stuff in here.
So if it's okay with you, so it's okay with you. We'll just make sure this is available on the phdma.org website.
Awesome.
When we're all done.
Yeah, thanks. Cool. So I'm basically giving you the short version of this longer tutorial. Yep. All right, so we're kind of in the mid. We're getting toward the end of it. Actually, we're in the story map zone. We started with a survey. We made a feature service from the survey. It does that behind the scenes, and we made a map from that, and we made a dashboard, and now we're in the story maps part. Great. So now map is really the powerful part about this. Okay, so here's my walkability for my BH mapping conference. I'm going to use that, and there's a couple of things to point out here. First of all, there's no embed code that I need. I can just say add a map and it says, okay, based on the symbology in that map, this is what it looks like at the moment. Can I edit that? Sure, I can edit it at this point. Let me scoot a couple of zoom windows around. See, I can, in the lower left here, you can see it edit in ArcGIS. I can actually edit this right now to say, I want the symbols to be the walkable or not walkable, or I want the symbols to be branches, snow, wide path or sidewalk, or some other indication that I have collected with my survey data. So I can actually go back into editing it at this point, or at any point in the future. But again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I'm liking that pretty well as it is, so I'm just going to go ahead and place that. Great. So now I've got this embedded map inside my story map. Great. Okay, what else can I do here? Well, let's take a look at the lesson. Inside the lesson, I have done that exact same thing. And then I say further on down, add a link to the dashboard. Okay, so here's my link to my dashboard. Let's just check it out ever so briefly. Here is my dashboard that I have tied to the lesson. Okay, so far so good. Interesting. So I can actually add the dashboard in right here. And in the slides that I have you, this is where we are in the slides. Why do we want to have a dashboard? Again, think about this, folks. You don't want to put elements into your story map just because they exist. You want to do it in the way that is going to communicate the results effectively. So in this case, of course, the idea is, why is walkability important? Why do communities care about it? And let's show the results of the walkability survey in my own community, and then the dashboard thus far as of this point in time. So inside my story map, then, I can put a link into the dashboard. So I can say, well, gosh, I can have I don't want that, of course. That's my quote from before. So what I really want is my dashboard. Let's go back to my tutorial. And okay, so unfortunately I erased my tutorial, so let's go back to it, no worries. Let's use this one right here. And let's go to new window and paste that one in to my story map. Okay. So here we have a dashboard inside my story map, along with an image, a title, some text, a web map. And if we had more time, we'd do a couple of things that are important. First of all, it is possible to have a story map, to create a story map without any metadata in the actual story map. But you know as much as I do that that's not really advisable. You really want to put at least some metadata in here, because oftentimes the user won't go to your metadata page for your story map. It's oftentimes a little bit hidden, right? If they don't know much about GIS, they're not going to know to go to your web page in your ArcGIS Online item and look at the metadata there. So I would put, especially for story maps, I'd put a lot of it here. I'd put your sources and so on and so forth, how often you updated it and so on in here. So pay attention to this, even though I'm giving it kind of short treatment today. I would definitely pay some attention to this. And so on. Okay, so another thing that you might want to think about, and I do have this in the lesson, is I'm going to scroll up a little bit. I have a link to the survey in it. remember way back when I showed you the original walkability story map, remember about a third of the way through, I have a link to the survey. The reason why you could think about doing this is that if you're communicating about topic X, all you would need is your story map, right? The story map has the dashboard, it has the web map, it has the survey already in it. So that's all you would actually need to share it with someone, which is what I have in that education blog post of mine. I just point to this, and then if they want to submit data, they could do it. Could I made that button a little bit more prominent? Maybe, sure. But the idea is put the survey actually in the story map if one of your goals is to have people get engaged about an issue and then say, oh, I want to contribute, and then they could do so. So the final result is going to be something like this. Once you go through the tutorial, it's going to give you something like this with an image and a survey embedded in there, the web map, and the dashboard, along with some closing comments and some metadata, if that makes sense. I hope that does, because we're sadly rapidly down to our last few minutes of time together. But let's talk about this. You would obviously save and share that story map, just like you would save and share the other elements, making sure that if you truly want it to be crowdsourced, that the story map has to be public, that the survey has to be public, but there's of course no requirement, right? You can still make these with your own group of researchers in your own organization. And connecting these is, I think, a very powerful part of this whole evolution into this platform that we all have embraced, where you have the ability to create these things in the online environment, share them in the online environment. And if you want to dig deeper, then as many of my colleagues have, you all have commented and explained in these last 2 days together, now I can run those points into analytical tools. I can do some analytical tools in ArcGIS Online. I've got about 40 analytical tools in ArcGIS Online. In ArcGIS Pro, I have about 1,500 analytical tools, and I can further analyze and create spatial statistics, derived maps inside Pro, or even in ArcGIS Online of the walkability data. And then look at, okay, what's my community like in terms of walkability? Why do these seem to be clustered as not walkable in this part of town, etc., right? Ditto for your other data that you collect. So I highly recommend running a few of those analysis tools on the results. That's the real power. That's why we all got into GIS in the first place, at least most of us, right? Because of those analytical tools. So even though we really didn't have much time in the workshop to discuss them, except for right now, that is the real power. And then of course you can display the results of those analytical tools in another map that you can then put into the story map. And of course that updates. That's the beauty of this. As more points get gathered, you've got, if some of those analytical tools are pointing to the live feed from your survey, depending on which tools you run, some of those can be updated and some of those cannot be updated. But for the ones that can be updated, we have a higher education chat that you don't have to be a higher education educator to participate in. But the reason why I mention it here is because this higher education chat is about, they usually focus on 1 or 2 tools every month. And the reason why I mention it right now is that last month, we had one of my colleagues talk about this, automate the updates to your web feature layers without scripting. So this touches on what I was just saying. If you look at that, you'll have some confidence and empowerment with what Gian shared with that chat, with that higher education chat, how to keep that feature service automatically updating. And then that becomes part of your story map that automatically updates. So you might want to take a look at that at some point. Okay, so that is really what I wanted to go into with you all about connecting surveys, maps, dashboards, and story maps. The story map is, again, the sort of the final product, right, that you would send someone that has the other elements in it. Is it the only way to go? Is this the only way you can do this? Can you use Experience Builder? Can you use can you use a hub? Sure, it depends on what you want to accomplish. This, to me, is the fastest and sort of the lowest hanging fruit way of collecting, analyzing, and communicating the results of your field data. But it's certainly not the only way. Comments, questions? Again, this is the lesson that I went through, the one that gives you the zip file of everything that you need. I also have a 4-part video on the Our Earth channel that actually guides you through this in video form. And there are some related resources that I should point out here. There's no shortage of deeper dives. Survey 123, our product manager for Survey 123, Ishmael Chivite, he is extremely wonderful and very responsive to the users. If there's something that bothers you about it, there's that forum, and he's very responsive. Oh yeah, let's fix that, that type of thing. We do have a MOOC on do-it-yourself web apps, and parts of this is actually included in there, how to build a dashboard and a story map and so on. There's also a GeoNet, now the Esri community place on Survey 123. Curtis mentioned the Learn Library of Lessons. There's a few Learn Library lessons. And then we also have a web app builder, story maps, experience builder, and dashboards story map that actually guides you through that. So thanks for letting me be a part of your lives here today, folks. I hope that was helpful in not only giving you some skills, but also confidence that I can do that. I can do that. And if I get stuck, I've got this community to help me.
Thanks so much, Joseph. Fantastic information. So I guess one thing that's come up several times, and I don't know if you're familiar with ArcHub much, but can you briefly describe the difference between the two and maybe some use cases between story maps and Hub?
Yeah, okay. Let me show you.
Or good resources.
Yeah, very good question. So many of these tools have similar functionalities. There's not really one blanket statement. It really depends on your needs and what you want to accomplish. So in this case, here's an example of why a hub worked for this particular, forgive the educational example again, but that's kind of my world, if you know what I mean. So when the health situation got to the point where people had to, I got to teach my kids online or my students online, or I'm a parent and I want them to be engaged in some sort of project at home. My colleagues and I set up a hub for the mapping hour. So it's 60-minute videos on how to create a hub site, how to create a story map, how to create a dashboard, how to go out in the field and collect data, even if your own local neighborhood that you're in sort of semi-confinement now. The hub worked well for several reasons. I mentioned a little clunkiness earlier in the story maps sharing, but hub, we had 4 of us to create these episodes, if you will. And we could all collaborate. We all had a login it tied to our organization. Inside your ArcGIS online organization, we created Hub, and 4 of us collaborated to create the resources. So simultaneously, we could add data, and in each one of the episodes, we could. It was good for us to create. Okay, episode 2. We could create this reference block. So here, inside Hub, you've probably seen these on other sites. Usually the hubs that more commonly are viewed are Pennington County Hub, right? And you've got the roads and the hydro and so this is using that same technology, but in this case, it's hey, here's our PDF of our lesson, here's our resources, here is the exploring elevation, etc. So it worked very well. The hub worked well because we were collaborating. We needed to get it done fast. And we wanted to serve a variety of different kinds of data in it, PDFs, data layers, lessons. So it allows us more flexibility than if we had all tried to create a story map, if that makes sense. Story maps are still, even though you can collaborate, they're more of, I think they're more useful for one or two persons to create on their results of their research. Hub was sort of the low-hanging fruit of, we didn't want a button over here or a widget over here that did this. If we did, we would have gone to Experience Builder. So here's an example, again, educational example. But in this case, I've got a course that is what I consider to be modern GIS. And so I move the course out of an LMS, a learning management system, Canvas in this case. And Canvas, many of you know, it's like Blackboard or WebCT or D2L. So it's locked and you have to be enrolled in that university or college to take it. So I wanted to move it out of there and make it available for everyone. What was the best way to do it? In this case, the best way to do it was for me to create a story map for every one of the weeks. And so I've got a story map for every one of the readings and the activities for that week, okay? And I stitched it all together with, as you can see here in the URL, Experience Builder. Why did I do it that way? Because it was easy for me to point to each one of these story maps. So I've got, every week has got 4-ish story maps, every one of these little tiles. So I've got roughly 35 story maps, and it's all stitched together with the Experience Builder. It gave me a little more power than Hub, but I didn't need more power, in which case I would have gone to, the Experience Builder would have given me pretty much anything I needed and more, but I didn't use, admittedly, 80% of the functionality in Experience Builder. I don't have custom widgets I didn't need it. So I just used it for what I needed. And that is to stitch the story maps together, basically, into a sort of it's not as pretty as it could have been, but at least functional, where I could go to week 1, readings, videos, etc. So I don't know, that's not a very good answer, I realize, Samantha. That is where this one here actually might be fairly helpful. Sorry about all these tabs. This one here, this fantastic 4 apps, Web App Builder, Story Maps, Experience Builder, and Dashboards. Actually, it's for some of our colleagues at Esri Canada, and they created this. What should you use when? It's their education team that actually built this, so it's admittedly, again, a little bit biased toward educational use, but hopefully it'll be useful for you all in the GIS professional community as well. But they do go into what just some guidelines. So, this kind of thing. So I think that's why I included it in the resources here.
I think that's fantastic, because I think sometimes we can all get pigeonholed into what we use and we have a preference, or it's daunting to learn something new. I know Experience Builder, there was a bit of a curve when I made my first one. But to even be able to look at a resource like this and go, nope, this is not going to meet my needs, instead of trying to build it and realizing that after the fact, would be fantastic.
And, I would just say also that, let's say you pick one of these tools and it doesn't quite meet your needs, so you back out and you use another one. It's not time lost, right? Because eventually you'll probably use that for something else. So it's all good, right? It's all part of our pathway forward and our learning.
Yeah, Joseph, one thing about this I think that is important, I find the whole universe here kind of overwhelming, but then I start to work with these things and I realize that all these apps, they're kind of built from the same components. It's you spend most of your time building the content, the maps, the dashboards, the things like that, and then those things get put into these tools. You know what I mean? It's all about those fundamental building blocks, and once you get that together, then you can that knowledge transfers to these different apps.
Indeed, well said.
So I'm not seeing any questions popping up or comments. So thank you for supplying a lot of our content today, Joseph. It's been awesome. There's so many resources that hopefully people got something from this, even if it's just the kind of drive to give something a try. And like you said, to realize it's not as daunting as it might seem to be. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for having me. And again, I have great respect for the community there. And I hope to see you all face to face, because as a geographer, you know, I love your part of the world and love to hang out with you at some point in the future. In the meantime, there's ways we can communicate, the listserv and so on. So look forward to learning from you all out there.